It has been almost 3 decades since the Cluckodon dropped onto our planet. 3 decades since at first they thought they could take us down by shooting an EMP wave across this planet. 3 decades since they realized that we do not screw around, and 3 decades since they learned you can die if somebody tries hard enough. And in those 3 decades, we have secured their ships, their technology. We have learned everything from them, reverse engineering all that we can. Many of our cities were still intact. Our industry took off like a shot because we wanted to build our new ships, our new weapons. Of course, humans being humans, we always competed with each other. Some states, some countries, some regions banded together so that they could actually create things much, much faster and have their own fleets, as of course everyone feared that human nature itself would turn on itself. However, there was one mitigating factor that would stop this in its tracks, and that was very simple. The fact that we have a common enemy. This enemy has one major issue. They have pissed us off. I was very young when they first showed up on our planet, but that doesn't have much to do with the fact that their technology, in particular, their energy technology, does something strange to the human physiology. My uncles, my father, my grandfathers, my mothers, grandmothers, everybody looks young. It's strange. We don't know what that energy field that comes off with. Some sort of, and I'm still learning this, some sort of quantum flux torsion dual something. I don't know. Physics was never really my thing. I have trouble figuring it out. I'm a little bit better with chemical engineering than anything else, but hey, to each their own. We're all wired different. And that's one of the reasons why their EMP shit didn't work. When they dropped it on, they didn't realize that a lot of our technology was already EMP resistant. Most of our fighters simply left. If the EMP was strong enough, of course, it's still going to shock the equipment. But it wasn't enough to actually make them plummet to the earth. And of course, ejection seats still work. They're manual. All in all, most of our aircraft had actually gotten back to the ground. A good thing too, because F-22s are expensive. And the last thing we need is those suckers just falling out of the sky by the hundreds. But all in all, when it was all said and done, they couldn't get off our planet because we had just simply swarmed them with old technology, sometimes digging out old tech as far as World War II, as many of those aircraft were what held the line at first until the rest of our fighters got refit just enough where they could resist the EMP shockwave if it happened again. We didn't think they'd fire the shockwave as it would fire into their own ships once inside our magnetosphere. They did send those probes and everything to do it, so it is what it is, of course. But as we developed everything, our fighters went from 5th and 6th generation to 7th and 8th and even 9th generation in about a decade. The advancements in technologies worldwide was absolutely insane. Most of us don't have to worry about anything like survival anymore. Hygiene is taken care of, and the population of the planet has somewhat stabilized. Now, there are some places that still refuse to use the technology, but let's just say you only have to have kids if you want to. Though this turned the species very hedonistic for about a decade, and of course vanity is always going to be a thing, there was still the issue that we had our own common enemies. And we would all join together to make sure that they would face the wrath of humanity itself. Eventually, our leaders figured out the star charts and got everything lined up and figured out a battle plan. The best battle plan. The best way to deal with the enemy that had come to our shores. And with those 3 decades of preparation, we were ready to stretch out. As we would reach out beyond our own sector, our own solar system, for the first time, many of our own decided to try and colonize other planets as well. Many of the ships they made were not warships, but instead colonization ships as they headed straight towards our neighbors. One that was solid red as it was covered in all sorts of metals that could be used, and the other one which was basically an acid-filled washing machine. It didn't matter. They were going to terraform them both. Luna had already several bases on them, and the humanity came together like never before. As the first colonies were going to reach Jupiter and Saturn, the fleet left and I was with them. I had joined on just to make sure that this was taken care of. Being a chemical engineer, we figured out the different types of elements that their ships were made out of, and also what the aliens were made out of. We had created not really a super virus, but something that would, well, if you pardon the pun, give them a real bad case of the shits. And then, they wouldn't exactly crap themselves to death, but they wouldn't be exactly in fighting shape either. It was actually kind of funny to watch them kind of do a strange type of crab walk over towards the latrine so they could relieve themselves. Once their body got to a certain point, they simply would pass out from dehydration. And then they wouldn't be fighting anybody. I wondered if this was going to be something we would use because I knew what the battle plan was. And as we jumped into FTL speeds, I felt the first ping of nausea as suddenly I realized our bodies were not meant to do this. But again, as a chemical engineer, I simply took the pills, or some people opted for the shot, and then off we went to the races. With the new technology and the new chemical engineering, we were able to make sure the human body does not degrade in the vacuum of space. Not to mention, with the technology of artificial gravity, we could simply lighten the gravity to ease off the pressure of our joints, allowing us to get a little bit taller, but not having the super pressure and allowing our hearts to not degrade like it would in 0G. It was a great way of doing things. It would take approximately 2 months to reach their home planet. This also was a long way because, well, we had to dodge a few of their other worlds. We had one target and one target in mind. As we got close, everyone got to their action stations. I might be an engineer, but I still had to help out if the battle turned into a furball. As we jumped into their sector, we saw that many of their ships had started to turn towards us. We had not gone unnoticed. Oh crap. I looked at the radar and I could see that our fleet was getting into position, a standard spindle formation to allow us to maximize our firepower. And with that, we got ready to fire our first large weapon. In unison, every single one of the ship opened up and charged up a strange weapon. The enemy had not seen this before, and we simply fired the burst towards their planet. We knew this wouldn't actually damage the planet as it wouldn't be able to breach through their own magnetosphere, but it did a number on their ships. And their ships were simply adrift in space as the wave of electromagnetic pulse flared across space and opened like a giant cone. It looked almost like a solar flare if you turned your resonance just a little bit so that you could see the pulse wave. It was beautiful. It was beautiful to see each of the enemy ships getting ready as their weapons began to turn and track us, and then all of a sudden they would simply start drifting sideways. We paid them no mind and just kept a watch on them as we continued on towards their planet. We could see other ships trying desperately to get outside their planet to try and help their own. We sent them a radio call, and it was very simple. Fire at us and you die. How about you go help your friends instead? They understood this, and the ships that actually broke the surface and got out past their own lunar orbit, well, of their 2 moons, that is, their second lunar orbit, they just bypassed us and went straight towards their own ships to try and get the crew. Without any type of power, they only had maybe 4 or 5 hours if they were lucky before either they ran out of air or they ran out of time. And by that, I mean they would either freeze or they would fry. Not a nice thing. Like my first instructor said, there's a million ways to die in space, and they all suck. Hopefully, for their case, they don't open up a bulkhead and then it would truly suck. We continued on towards the enemy planet. They began to send all sorts of threats and then cries for mercy when they realized that their fleet was completely taken apart, was completely useless as it floated there in the void. We got close to them, and then we began to surround their planet. I would have no doubt that they were getting ready for an orbital bombardment or for us to drop transports down to the surface so that we could take their planet as a whole. We caught a few transmissions as they desperately called for reinforcements from any of their other colonies, but they never got a response. I guess they figured if the home fleet was taken out so quickly, what was the point? And as we finally got in position, most of us were almost giddy at what was going to happen next. The enemy could only stare up at the sky as many large cylinders were dropped from the ships. Not launched, but dropped. All you have to do is release them towards the gravity well and let gravity do the work for you. As these cylinders plummeted through their atmosphere, they all must have probably looked at them as nuclear devices, something to glass their planet, something to end their life as they know it. Well, they're half right. As they reached approximately 35,000 feet, they exploded, each of them across the planet. And again, changing the spectral analysis on my screen, I could see the blast wave, a massive EMP, easily 30 times stronger than what they had hit us with, radiated across their planet from each of the cylinders. They were simply EMP bombs. They spread out across with such force that even anything that was protected in a Faraday cage was not fully protected. The EMP would radiate down even a mile and a half below the surface. That's how many electrons were being shoved down into that planet. And we watched on the screen as many of their vehicles, seemingly hover vehicles, simply dropped the meter to the ground. Violently, too, just boom, hitting the ground. This didn't seem to hurt anyone. It simply just brought everything to a halt. We then sent another group of cylinders down. This one, as it got towards the surface, seemed to turn. It looked more like a drone. It popped wings, and as it went across each of the population centers, each of these drones began to drop simple leaflets. Each of these leaflets had a simple message. Payback's a bitch. We waited another 48 hours before we did the same thing. We dropped another bunch of leaflets. The leaflets stated simply, "Leave us alone." Behind this was a whole bunch of shuttles that came down from most of our transport ships. Inside the shuttles were those that we had caught before, as they were no longer of any use to us. As our shuttles landed, the doors opened, and the former prisoners were basically thrown out, shoved out as fast as possible. We didn't care about being nice, as they had come to our planets to invade, but not to destroy. And as our shuttles left, we got ready to leave their home planet. Now, many throughout history would most likely judge us by saying, "Why didn't you just glass their planet? Why didn't you just exterminate the species?" Well, the fact is, we were going for more poetic justice. You see, they did not come to our planet to annihilate us. They came to capture us. And showing that we could do the exact same to them was enough of a warning. Especially since by our best estimates, it would take them another 50 of their years, basically their own lifespan, to actually build their planet back up to what it was before we showed up. On our way out, we scanned their vessels, those that were still adrift in space. Most of them had been cleared out of all potential life. And when we got aside each of them, we harpooned the sides and grabbed their ships. We got on board and confirmed that there was no one left. They had done their job and they had secured their own folks. The only thing that their species had now on their planet that had any power were the few ships that they had sent up to recover their own people. Thankfully, they weren't stupid enough to try us on, as we outnumbered them easily 4-1. Not to mention, we were able to check their weapon systems, and it was kind of funny how ineffective they would have been. If there's one thing we're good at, it's making things that go boom and things that shoot really far and really straight. I hope they keep this in mind as we captured their ships, strapped them onto ours, and then jumped in the FTL space, making sure that they had nothing left but just their own planet. Maybe, just maybe, when they pull themselves back up by their bootstraps, they'll be a little smarter. If not, you could always use my invention and give them a real bad case of the shits.